Now, for more on Netflix's expansion into China and their general strategy going forward, I'm joined by Jamaal Finkley. He's the president of the Hollywood Post and founder of BlackTreeTV. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me once again.
Now, this deal between Netflix and China's iQIYI has really been a long time coming. We've seen some excitement about the announcement, but how much of a game changer is it?
It's a huge game changer. I mean, Netflix's goals were stated pretty clearly to be in every household around the world, to be available. And China has been a huge roadblock for that with their regulations. And this licensing deal pretty much gives them at least a step in that direction. They haven't fulfilled their goals, but it's a move towards being able to reach that continent also. And I think it's a huge move, and I think it'll grow from this licensing deal and maybe add more titles until you get a more complete rollout of Netflix content in China.
So certainly the start of some momentum. Now, like Netflix, we've seen other foreign companies really using partnerships as a way to make inroads in the Chinese streaming market. How important is that to have that connection?
I think it's important. I mean, China has a unique regulatory rules with that country, and I think just to try to blend what Netflix would think is great content with what the Chinese regulations would allow, I think is probably the way to go in. Whereas Netflix wanted to give their full catalog, that might not be available right now, but I think it's a step in the right direction, and hopefully through customer the customer demand from there in China, after they become more familiar with the service, I think it will be more and more titles, and the partnerships with Chinese content producers, I think, will solidify that partnership and maybe see some of the Chinese producers' content here and around the world also.
Now, let's talk about the company's successful efforts in other countries, for example, Brazil. What have they gotten right there?
Well, with Brazil, a similar deal is that they were able to go with one of their streaming services and produce some content. I think it's been a good rollout there. It's been a good test market. Brazil, Globo has pretty much dominated the Brazilian television market, and they've seen Netflix as kind of a threat, but I think they've also started streaming their own products and seen that it wasn't affecting their reviews, their ratings, and they're starting to believe more in the streaming process also. But because they have such a strong foothold with their broadcast and communications in Brazil, Netflix coming in and being allowed to share some of their content has been, I think, a good experiment, a good test for what's going on in China also.
And speaking of being tested, we know that Netflix is still dealing with seeing a lot of its original content being hacked and leaked online. What's your reaction to this, and how should Netflix respond?
Ironically, I just spoke to the cast and creators of Orange is the New Black today, and they spoke about that. And there is some concern that as they move into other markets, some of these things will be pirated. But at the end of the day, because Netflix doesn't rely on ratings per se, and they don't publicize their numbers, I think getting the eyeballs on this content is still very important. They don't, of course, support the hack, but I think the interest in their content around the world is still important to them, and they're just going to try to figure out ways to secure their content in a better fashion.
And let's look at some other challenges of Netflix when it comes to expanding its reach into other markets. You have things like language barriers, areas without the infrastructure for high-speed internet. What do you see as really potentially stalling the company's growth in the future?
Well, I think all of those things will be overcome. I mean, I think worldwide we've seen increases in bandwidth and internet, and hopefully those areas that haven't been able to increase their bandwidth will be in the future. That's definitely, technology is definitely one hurdle that Netflix always has to jump over. But I think the blending of content, I mean, as Narcos had become such a popular show in America with a Spanish-based language series, I think the same thing can happen when Netflix goes to these other countries and starts developing content that's particular to that region, and it becomes popular in America and worldwide. I think it's part of the global partnership that Netflix wants to do with content providers and viewers. So that's a hurdle that I think they're gonna overcome eventually. As long as they continue to produce great content, I think they're gonna continue to grow.
And just quickly, we know that Netflix does have its competitors. You have Amazon trying to nip at its heels. You also have YouTube. What does Netflix need to do to stay competitive?
I think one of the things they do is they spend $6 billion a year on acquisitions, whereas some of the other services, such as HBO Go, spends 2.5, Showtime spends less. I think as long as they put in their money behind behind the content, I think they'll continue to be the leaders in that field. And they seem to have believed in themselves enough to say that we're going to spend the most on acquiring and producing the most content. So I think there'll be a leader in that field as long as they keep that commitment.
I'm sure a lot of people will be watching this space. Thank you so much, Jamaal Finkley, president of Hollywood Post and founder of BlackTreeTV.